Dad.
The ring hit the marble floor before the boy finished his sentence. 600 guests watched Korea's most feared man go pale over 4 words. Dad, aren't you coming home? And none of them yet knew whose son was standing in that doorway. If you believe loyalty shouldn't come with a knife hidden behind it, hit subscribe right now, because Baek Sung-ho spent 6 years smiling at a man he was quietly destroying. Only manipulators and fake loyal uncles won't like this video. Everyone else? Smash that subscribe button before the real action begins. The Grand Chosun Cathedral smelled like money that had been laundered twice. Once through the banks, once through the flowers. 600 white orchids lined the aisle, each one costing more than the average Seoul apartment's monthly rent, which felt fitting, since the wedding itself was also a real estate transaction wearing a tuxedo. Kang Min-jae stood at the altar the way he stood everywhere. Still, expensive, and slightly terrifying. His suit had been tailored twice because the first tailor's hand shook too badly to finish the hem. Nobody had told the man it was for a wedding and not a funeral, and honestly, the confusion was understandable. Min-jae's face didn't do celebration. It did calculation. Right now, it was calculating exactly how many minutes remained until he could stop performing happiness and go back to running his empire in peace. Beside him, at a safe and profitable distance, stood Yoon Hae-rim, daughter of the Yoon shipping dynasty, heiress to 400 cargo vessels and zero illusions about what this marriage actually was. She'd once told her sister, over champagne she wasn't supposed to be drinking before noon, "I'm not marrying a man. I'm merging with a mood." Today, the mood wore cologne and diamond cufflinks and looked, if anyone bothered to notice, faintly relieved that the officiant was almost done talking. 200 bodyguards lined the walls dressed as ushers, because nothing says true love like men with earpieces scanning exits for snipers. Somewhere in the back pews, the Seoul underworld's entire leadership sat shoulder to shoulder in rented Italian suits, smiling the specific smile people wear when they hate each other. But the catering is very good. Baek Sung-ho sat in the second row, closest to the family, exactly where a loyal uncle should sit. He'd known Min-jae since the boy was 12 and terrified of his own father. He taught him how to hold a gun, how to hold his tongue, and, most usefully, how to hold a grudge for exactly as long as necessary and not one day longer. Today, Sung-ho wore black, which the wedding planner had assumed was simply his personal style. It was, in fact, closer to foreshadowing. "Do you, Kang Min-jae, take Yoon Hae-rim?" The officiant's voice climbed toward the vaulted ceiling, like it was trying to escape the room too. Min-jae opened his mouth. He had rehearsed this line the way he rehearsed everything. Flatly, efficiently, with zero emotional investment. The same tone he used to approve shipping manifests. His hand found the ring in his pocket. His mind, against every instruction it had been given for 6 years, found Han So-yeon's face instead. He hated that it still did that. Grief was supposed to have a shelf life. His had expired long ago and kept showing up anyway, uninvited, like a ghost with terrible timing. The cathedral doors, 12 feet of imported oak, hinges oiled that very morning so they wouldn't so much as creak, didn't creak. They slammed. Every head turned. 200 bodyguards reached for weapons they weren't supposed to draw at a wedding, then froze, because the threat standing in the doorway was 5 years old, wearing a suit clearly bought for a much larger future version of himself, and breathing like he'd run the last 6 blocks on legs too short for the job. He wasn't crying. That was the detail that would haunt every guest in that room for years. The boy wasn't scared, wasn't confused, wasn't lost. He looked at Min-jae the way you look at something you've been promised your whole life and were starting to suspect was a lie. "Dad," he said, and the word landed in that cathedral like a verdict. "Aren't you coming home anymore?" The ring slipped from Min-jae's fingers. It hit the marble floor and spun, once, twice, the sound obscenely loud in a silence 600 people were suddenly too afraid to break. Nobody picked it up. Behind the boy, a woman stepped into the light wearing a coat too plain for a room this expensive. Her eyes down, her shoulders braced like someone who'd spent 6 years learning how to enter a room without being seen. Min-jae's breath left his body in one motion, the way a king's composure is supposed to be bulletproof, and somehow, tonight, wasn't. He knew that face. He had built an empire specifically so he'd never have to stop looking for it. "Seo-yeon," he said. and the wedding, whatever was left of it, was already over. The cathedral had gone from a wedding to a courtroom in under 10 seconds, and Min Jae was suddenly the man on trial. He walked, not toward the altar, not toward Hae Rim, not toward the 600 guests currently recalculating the entire social hierarchy of Seoul in real time. He walked toward the boy the way a man walks toward a bomb he isn't sure is armed, carefully, and with the distinct feeling that turning back was no longer an option his body was willing to consider. "Say that again," Min Jae said. His voice, usually a weapon he kept sheathed, came out cracked in a way none of his 200 bodyguards had ever heard. A few of them exchanged glances, silently agreeing to never discuss this moment again on penalty of death, which, given their employer, was not a figure of speech. The boy didn't flinch. If anything, he looked mildly annoyed, the way children get when adults are slow to understand something obvious. "I said, aren't you coming home anymore? Mom said you were busy. She didn't say you were getting married." He glanced at Hayrim with the frank, devastating honesty only a 5-year-old can legally get away with. "She's pretty, but she's not Mom." Somewhere behind Min Jae, Yoon Hayrim made a sound that was somehow both a laugh and the beginning of a lawsuit. Min Jae crouched. It was, perhaps, the first time in 11 years anyone in that room had seen Korea's most feared man lower himself to anyone's level. And the symbolism was not lost on the 24 rival bosses currently filming this on phones they would later be forced, at gunpoint, to delete. Up close, the boy had his mother's stubborn chin, and Min Jae's stomach dropped through the marble floor. His own late father's eyebrows, heavy and unimpressed with the world by default. Genetics, it turned out, did not care about paperwork, court documents, or 6 years of grief therapy Min Jae had never actually attended because kings don't do therapy, they do denial, and call it focus. "What's your name?" Min Jae asked, already knowing, already terrified of the answer, confirming what his chest had figured out 4 sentences ago. "Ji-ho," the boy said, holding up the paper star like a passport at customs. "You made this. Mom kept it in a box. She said it was the last good thing you ever made before you started making bad ones." Somewhere in the second row, Baek Sung-ho's expression did something complicated. A flicker, gone as fast as it arrived. The specific micro-expression of a man watching a 6-year plan develop an unscheduled plot twist. Nobody clocked it except the security camera above the confessional booth, quietly recording, the way security cameras do, without opinions or urgency, which would turn out to be a mistake somebody would pay for later. Si-yeon finally lifted her eyes, and there it was. The face Min Jae had paid investigators across 3 countries to find. The face that had outlived a typhoon, an ocean, and apparently an entire funeral held in her honor. "You buried an empty box," she said quietly, "and called it me." "They told me there was nothing left to bury," Min Jae said. I checked. I checked for 6 years." "I know." Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired in the specific way of someone who'd spent 6 years being tired on purpose, because the alternative was being found. "That's exactly why I couldn't let you find anything." Before Min Jae could ask the obvious, devastating, cathedral-shaped question, "Found by who?" Hayrim's father, Yoon Chairman, rose from the front pew with the particular fury of a man who had just watched a $2 billion shipping merger evaporate in real time because of a paper origami star. "Kang Min Jae," he said, voice booming with the practiced outrage of someone who negotiates hostile takeovers for breakfast. "Is this some kind of joke?" Min Jae stood, lifting Ji-ho onto his hip in the same motion, an instinct he didn't know he had until his body simply did it, the way muscle memory sometimes arrives 6 years late, but exactly on time. "No," Min Jae said, and for the first time that day, his voice held zero calculation, just certainty. "This is my son." Yoon Chairman opened his mouth to respond. He never got the chance, because that was the exact moment the stained glass window above the altar exploded inward, raining colored glass over 600 screaming guests, and the first bullet went, with surgical precision, straight for the boy in Min Jae's arms. Time, Min Jae would later swear, did something physically impossible in that half-second. It didn't slow down. It simply stopped being relevant. He didn't remember deciding to move. He remembered being upright with Ji-ho in his arms, and then he remembered being on the marble floor with Ji-ho underneath him, and the space between those two facts was simply gone, deleted, the way a king's body apparently keeps a separate, faster nervous system reserved exclusively for his children, a feature Min Jae hadn't known he came pre-installed with. since until 6 minutes ago he hadn't known he had children at all. The bullet took a chunk out of the pew where Jiho's head had been. Splinters of imported oak sprayed across white orchids that had, until 90 seconds ago, represented the single most expensive flower arrangement in Gangnam's wedding history. Now they represented evidence. 600 guests discovered, collectively and instantly, that a cathedral full of gold leaf and imported marble offers exactly zero cover from gunfire. Screaming replaced singing. The orchestra, bless them, they were union, kept their instruments but abandoned the actual music, which felt like the correct professional call. Down! Min Jae's head of security, a barrel-chested man named Yu Dae-sung, who had personally taken 2 bullets for Min Jae's father and lived to complain about the paperwork, was already moving guests toward the side exits with the brisk, joyless efficiency of a man who trained for exactly this scenario and hated being right. Min Jae, still on the floor, still covering Ji-ho with his entire body, like the boy was made of something more breakable than most children, looked up, not toward the shattered window, but toward the second row, toward Baek Sung-ho, who was, notably, not screaming, not diving for cover, not doing any of the things 600 terrified guests were currently doing. He was standing very still, hands folded, watching the broken window with the expression of a man checking whether a package he'd ordered had arrived on schedule. It had not. That much was obvious even from across the room. Something in Song-ho's jaw tightened. Not fear, not the confused twitch of an innocent bystander, but the specific, controlled fury of a man whose carefully engineered chaos had just missed its mark, and who was now recalculating expenses. Second window, north side, Dae-sung barked into his earpiece. Shooters mobile. Repeat. Mobile. Do not engage near civilians. A second shot rang out. This one didn't come near Ji-ho. It came for the exit, clipping the ornate door frame 6 inches from where Si-yeon had frozen, half shielding her own body in front of the fleeing bride's father, because apparently self-preservation had never been Si-yeon's strongest instinct, even after 6 years of practicing it. Get her down! Min Jae roared, and 2 of his men tackled Si-yeon behind an overturned pew with the gentleness of men who understood exactly whose mother they were currently manhandling. Here's the part that would keep Seoul's tabloids employed for the next 3 years. The shooter never fired a third shot. Not because he ran out of ammunition, not because security cornered him, because somebody inside that cathedral shot him first. The crack came from behind the organ pipes, precise, single, professional. The kind of shot that costs 6 figures on the open market and comes with a guaranteed no-refund policy. The assassin dropped from the broken window ledge like a marionette whose owner had simply lost interest, and hit the courtyard stone 2 floors below with a finality that ended any hope of interrogating him. Silence again, but a different kind. The kind that comes after violence rather than before it. Min Jae lifted his head slowly, scanning the organ loft. No shooter visible, no confession forthcoming. Just an empty rifle casing rolling gently across polished wood, and the uncomfortable realization settling into his chest like cold water. Someone in that cathedral had both the skill and the will to execute a professional killer mid-attack in front of 600 witnesses without hesitation, which meant somebody else had known this was coming. Ji-ho, still pinned safely beneath his father's chest, looked up with the particular calm of a child who had apparently already survived worse than this, which was its own devastating piece of information Min Jae wasn't ready to unpack yet. Is it always like this at your work? The boy asked. Min Jae almost laughed. Almost. Not usually at weddings. Across the wreckage of orchids and shattered glass, Seo-yeon met his eyes for the first time since she'd stepped through those doors, and for one unguarded second, before 6 years of careful fear reassembled itself across her face, Min Jae saw something that terrified him more than the gunfire had. Relief. Because whoever had been hunting Ji-ho for 6 years had just made their first move in the open, and that meant the second one was already on its way. The reception hall beneath the cathedral had been converted in the space of 11 minutes, from a 5-star banquet room into a makeshift war room, which, considering the caliber of guests still trapped inside, wasn't as large a stretch as it should have been. Dae-sung had sealed every exit except one, posted men at windows nobody thought to check before tonight, and confiscated phones with the polite but non-negotiable insistence of a man who had once made a senator cry using only a raised eyebrow. 600 guests sat on gilded chairs meant for champagne toasts, now nursing shock, and, in a few cases, minor lacerations from decorative glass that had, until recently, depicted a very serene image of Saint Michael defeating evil. The irony was not subtle. Nobody had the energy to appreciate it. Min Jae sat with Ji-ho wrapped in his suit jacket, the boy finally, mercifully, asleep against his chest, exhausted the specific way children get after they've been braver than the adults around them. Seo-yeon sat 2 feet away, close enough to touch, far enough that 6 years of silence still occupied the space between them, like a third person nobody had invited. "Start talking," Min Jae said. Not a request. Seo-yeon exhaled slowly, the sound of someone finally setting down a weight she'd been carrying alone since a coastal road and a typhoon that never actually happened the way the report claimed. 3 days before the accident, someone sent me a photo. My sonogram. No note. I didn't need one. Whose photo could that have been? Min Jae's jaw was granite. "I never told anyone you were. You didn't have to tell anyone," she said. "Somebody was already watching me. Watching us. Somebody who understood exactly what a king with something soft to protect becomes: vulnerable, predictable, manageable." She looked at him, steady now, the fear finally burning off into something closer to fury. "So I disappeared before they could turn me into the reason you made a mistake that got you killed. You could have come to me. You were becoming a man who buried people who inconvenienced his father's business," Sion said quietly. "I didn't know which version of you would answer the door." The words landed harder than the bullet had. Min Jae said nothing, because there was nothing honest to say that didn't confirm exactly the man he'd been forced to become in her absence. Across the room, Dae-sung approached with the particular posture of a man carrying information he didn't want to be the one carrying. "Sir, we pulled the shooter's ID. Contract killer, freelance, based out of Busan. Paid through 3 shell accounts, untraceable on paper." He paused. "But the money moved through a numbered account we've seen before." "Whose?" Dae-sung's eyes flicked, involuntarily, toward the door where Baek Sung-ho had been quietly assisting guests to safety for the last 20 minutes, an act of loyalty so convenient it bordered on theatrical. "It's an old account," Dae-sung said carefully. "From your father's era. One of the ones we assumed was retired after he passed." Min Jae's expression didn't change. That, more than shouting would have, was the terrifying part. The specific stillness of a man doing arithmetic that ended in betrayal. "Bring him in," Min Jae said, quietly. "I want to ask him myself why an account only 3 people know exists, just paid for my son's assassination." Before Dae-sung could move, the ballroom doors opened, and Sung-ho walked in first, unbidden, wearing the exact expression of a man who'd rehearsed grief in a mirror that morning and was disappointed with his own performance. "Min Jae?" His voice cracked with practiced devastation. "Thank God you're both all right. I've had men combing every inch of that cathedral. Whoever did this, we will find them. I swear it on your father's grave." Min Jae studied him the way he studied contracts before signing them. Every clause, every silence between the words. "Uncle," he said finally, voice flat as a closed door. "Tell me something. Anything. When exactly did you retire my father's numbered accounts?" For exactly 1 second, one single, unguarded second that 6 years of careful performance couldn't quite cover in time, something moved behind Baek Sung-ho's eyes. Not confusion, not innocence. Recognition of a door he thought had been locked, suddenly standing open. "I'm not sure what you mean," he said, smiling the smile of a man who had just realized the game had changed, and that his opponent finally knew he was playing one. Min Jae smiled back, the smile of a king who no longer needed 6 years or 3 countries of investigators to find what he was looking for. It had been standing in his own house the entire time. Baek Sung-ho didn't run. Men who run are men who've already lost, and Sung-ho had built an entire second life on the principle of never looking like he was losing, even while doing exactly that. Instead, he laughed. Not loudly, just enough to fill the silence Min Jae had left hanging in the ballroom like a loaded question. "You think I'd hurt that boy?" He gestured toward Ji-ho, still asleep against his father's chest, oblivious to the fact that the man now being quietly surrounded by 6 bodyguards had once bounced him. Theoretically, hypothetically, terrifyingly. on his knee at a christening that never happened. I've known you since you were a boy who cried the first time he had to discipline a man who stole from your father. I taught you how to survive this world. You taught me how to survive it, Min-jae said. You never mentioned you were the reason I needed the lessons. Song-ho's smile thinned, the mask slipping by degrees now, the way ice cracks, quietly, then all at once. Careful, Min-jae. Accusations in a room full of witnesses have a way of becoming inconvenient. So does a numbered account only 3 people alive know exists, Min-jae said, paying a Busan contractor to put a bullet through a 5-year-old boy at his own father's wedding. Somewhere behind them, Yoon chairman, still furious about his evaporated merger, but pragmatic enough to recognize a better story unfolding in real time, leaned toward his daughter and whispered something that sounded suspiciously like renegotiating terms. Song-ho's eyes moved, just once, toward Seo-yeon. It was brief. It was also the single worst thing he could have done, because Min-jae had spent 6 years learning to read micro-expressions the way other men read stock tickers, and that flicker of contempt, pure, unguarded, the look of a man irritated that his loose end had grown legs and walked back into the room, told him everything the numbered account couldn't. You knew she survived, Min-jae said slowly. Not just suspected. Knew. I knew nothing. You've been paying Min to make sure she stayed hidden, Min-jae continued, each word landing like a nail. And when she came back on her own, when your 6 years of careful cleanup walked through my cathedral doors holding my son's hand, you panicked. You made a call. You made it badly. You have no proof of any of this, Song-ho said, and for the first time his voice lost its practiced warmth entirely, dropping into something colder, older. The voice of the man who'd actually built half of Min-jae's empire in the shadows, while everyone thanked the wrong king. I don't need proof, Min-jae said. I have Dae-sung, 6 bodyguards, and a very motivated shipping chairman who just watched his daughter's engagement collapse because of your incompetence. Somebody in this room is going to want to talk. It's simply a matter of which one of your men breaks first. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Sung-ho did something none of them expected. He smiled again, wider this time, genuinely amused. The specific amusement of a man revealing he still held a card nobody had accounted for. You misunderstand the shape of this, Min-jae, he said quietly. I didn't do this alone. I was never the one giving the orders. I was simply the one loyal enough to carry them out. He glanced, almost tenderly, toward the sleeping boy. Your father made enemies you were too young to remember. Some of them have been very patient. 6 years patient. The kind of patient that doesn't stop just because tonight didn't go according to plan. Seo-yeon went rigid beside Min-jae. What does that mean? It means, Sung-ho said, straightening his cufflinks with the calm of a man who'd already accepted he was leaving this room in restraints, that whoever hired me to keep your secret buried isn't in this ballroom, and they are considerably less sentimental than I am about collateral damage. Dae-sung's men closed in, cuffs out, the theatrical loyalty finally, mercifully, over. But Min-jae wasn't looking at Sung-ho anymore. He was looking at the ballroom's east doors, where a runner, one of his own men, breathless, sprinting past 600 guests who'd already had quite enough excitement for one evening, was shoving through the crowd with a phone held out like a live grenade. Sir, the runner said, voice cracking. It's the flower shop. Seo-yeon's flower shop. The one in Busan she used as a front. What about it? Min-jae said, though something in his stomach already knew. It's on fire, the runner said. And there's a message spray-painted on the front window. It's addressed to you. The message, when the photo finally loaded on Dae-sung's phone with the agonizing slowness of a war room Wi-Fi connection under siege, read simply, You buried the wrong person. The dead is still open. Sprayed in red across the scorched glass of a flower shop that had, for 6 years, sold tulips to Busan housewives who had no idea the quiet woman behind the counter was raising a Mafia king's son on cash and false paperwork. Min-jae stared at the photo until the letters stopped looking like words and started looking like a signature. Because that was exactly what it was. That's my father's phrase, he said quietly. The dead is still open. He used to say it to men who thought loyalty had an expiration date. He looked up at Sung-ho, still cuffed, still infuriatingly composed. Who else knew that phrase? Sung-ho didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was its own confession, and both men in that room understood it belonged to somebody Neither of them wanted to name out loud in front of 600 witnesses and a Yoon shipping chairman currently live texting his lawyer. Get her somewhere safe, Min Jae said to Dae-sung, nodding towards Seo Yeon, who had gone very still in the particular way of someone doing the math on how many more people knew where she'd hidden her son for 6 years. Both of them. Safe House 3. Nobody outside this room, not even the men guarding the door tonight. You think it's someone in this room? Dae-sung asked, low. I think, Min Jae said, that a man just tried to shoot my son in a cathedral with 200 of my own guards standing 30 feet away, and somehow got a rifle onto a rooftop nobody cleared. That's not luck. That's an inside door somebody's been oiling for years. His eyes moved, deliberately, slow and cold, across the ballroom, across faces that had smiled at him for a decade, men who'd sworn loyalty over soju and blood oaths that apparently came with fine print. Seo Yeon reached for Ji-ho, still miraculously asleep, and Min Jae realized, with a strange, unfamiliar ache, that some part of him didn't want to hand the boy over. 6 years of not knowing this child existed, and already the idea of him being carried out of the room without Min Jae's arms around him felt like an amputation. I'm coming with you, Min Jae said. You're the target, Seo Yeon said. Both of you being in the same car is the worst decision you could make right now. I've made worse, Min Jae said. I married the wrong woman twice tonight if you count the ceremony that didn't finish. It wasn't quite a joke. It landed somewhere close to one anyway. And for one flickering second, something passed between them that looked almost like the 6 years hadn't happened at all. The oldies, buried under grief and gunpowder, still alive somewhere underneath. Then Sung-ho spoke, quietly, almost gently, the way a man speaks when he's already decided he has nothing left to lose. You still don't understand who you're dealing with, Min Jae. Whoever hired me isn't finished because I got caught. If anything, I was insurance, the softer option, the one who'd have let the boy grow up somewhere far away and never come back. His eyes were steady, almost pitying. You've just made them very aware that soft options are off the table. Who? Min Jae said, closing the distance between them until they were nearly chest to chest, patience finally, fully gone. Give me a name and I'll consider letting you keep your teeth. Song-ho smiled his last smile of the evening. Small, resigned, almost fond. The way a man smiles at a chess opponent who's finally caught up to a move he made 3 turns ago. Ask your father's old ledger, he said. The one you burned when you took over because you wanted a clean start. There was a name in there you never bothered to read. A silent partner. Someone who financed half your father's empire and never once asked for a seat at the table because he was patient enough to wait for the whole table to fall into his lap instead. A name, Min Jae said again, quieter now, more dangerous for it. Song-ho's expression finally cracked, not from fear of Min Jae, but from something that looked, disturbingly, like fear of the answer itself. Ask your mother, he said. She's the only one still alive who signed that ledger with him. And for the second time that night, the room went silent enough to hear a wedding ring. Somewhere on that marble floor 2 stories above them, finally stopped spinning. Kang Min Jae's mother had been dead to the business for 11 years. Not literally dead, just quietly retired to a tea house in Gapyeong, where she grew orchids that didn't cost as much as the ones currently rotting in cathedral wreckage, and where nobody was supposed to remember she'd once been sharper than her husband on his best day. Min Jae hadn't spoken to her about the empire since his father's funeral. She'd made it clear, in the specific, gentle but final way only Korean mothers can manage, that she wanted no part of what her husband had built. And Min Jae, grieving, furious, 28 and freshly crowned, had respected that silence the way you respect a door someone's asked you never to open. He opened it now. The drive to Gapyeong took 90 minutes. Ji-ho slept the whole way, curled against Seo Yeon in the back seat. One small hand fisted in the fabric of his father's borrowed jacket, even in sleep, as though some part of him understood that letting go, even briefly, had cost his family 6 years the first time. His mother answered the door in a cardigan, holding gardening shears, looking for one full second like the mother he remembered before she became a widow and he became a king. Then she saw the boy asleep in Seo Yeon's arms, and something in her face didn't ask a single question. It already knew. You found her, she said. She found me, Min Jae said. At my wedding, which didn't finish. Good, his mother said. with the brutal efficiency of a woman who had never once liked Yoon-hae-rim's father and had only tolerated the merger because widows learned to pick their battles. She stepped aside to let them in, then paused, her eyes settling on Min-jae with a different kind of weight. "You didn't come all this way for tea," Sung-ho said, "to ask you about a silent partner, a name in father's old ledger, someone who financed half the empire and never took a seat at the table." His mother's hands, still holding the shears, went very still. "Sit down," she said. "All of you. This is going to take longer than tea." It took 40 minutes, 3 pots of it, and one confession that rearranged everything Min-jae thought he understood about his father's rise to power. The silent partner was his mother's own brother, a man exiled from the family decades ago after a business dispute nobody discussed at holidays, who had quietly funded Min-jae's father's earliest ventures on the condition his name never appeared anywhere official, in exchange for a promise that one day, when the empire was strong enough to survive the scandal, he'd be brought back into the fold. His father had died before honoring that promise, and a patient man, given 6 more years to watch his nephew inherit everything he'd secretly built, had apparently run out of patience the moment a 5-year-old boy became living proof that the empire now had an heir who might make the debt permanently, comfortably forgotten. "He's not a monster, Min-jae," his mother said quietly. "He's a man who watched his own name get erased from a fortune he helped create. That kind of erasure does something to people. It did something to him. It doesn't excuse a bullet aimed at my son." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't. But it explains why he'll stop the moment he believes he's finally been seen." Min-jae sat with that for a long moment, watching Ji-ho stir against Seo-yeon's shoulder, watching his mother's hands finally set down the shears she'd been gripping like the last honest thing in the room. He made the call that night, not to threaten, not to hunt, but to invite. A seat at the table, publicly, formally, the promise his father had died owing finally paid in full. It wasn't forgiveness. It was arithmetic. The kind his father should have done years ago, and the kind that ended, 3 days later, with a quiet, permanent ceasefire and a man who'd spent 6 years feeling erased finally seeing his name attached to something again. Yoon-hae-rim, for her part, sent one final text before blocking Min-jae's number entirely. "Glad you found your family. Send flowers to my father's lawyers. They earned them." Min-jae sent an entire truckload. It felt appropriate. 6 weeks later, in a garden that grew far better orchids than any cathedral ever had, Kang Min-jae folded a single paper star with hands that had once signed death warrants and now, more importantly, signed adoption papers making everything already true, legally true. Ji-ho unfolded it immediately, inspecting the terrible handwriting inside with the same critical eye his mother once had. "Still bad," the boy announced. "Some things," Min-jae said, pulling both of them close, "don't need fixing, just finishing." And for the first time in 6 years, the king went home.